I'm Detective James Patterson, Macon Police Department, Georgia. 23 years on the force, and I thought I'd seen it all. But the Lauren Giddings case, Christ, it still haunts my dreams. When forensic health professionals evaluate stalking, they examine four essential components that I've come to understand intimately through this investigation. The nature of the relationship between the stalker and the victim, the stalker's motivations, the psychological and social realities of the stalker, and the psychological and social vulnerabilities of the victim. The subject of this case is 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel, and to gain a deeper understanding of these components, I had to extract certain elements through the knowledge of hindsight, something that still keeps me awake at night, wondering what signs I might have missed, what red flags could have saved Lauren's life, if only we'd been looking in the right direction. The evolution of technology over the past 2 decades has made forensic investigations considerably more efficient. 2 of the items on the forensic checklist can now be examined through a single component, which would otherwise take forensics weeks or even months to conduct in a previous era. And that component is internet search history. The disclosure of web browser data is often a crucial piece of evidence for building a case, as it can unveil many aspects of a suspect's personality that would otherwise be kept hidden. And this is sometimes far more effective than anything else presented in court, including information extracted during a full confession. When I first learned about Stephen McDaniel's internet history, I felt sick to my stomach. Without going into specific detail, a large majority of the subject's time was spent watching pornography that surrounded themes of violence and torture. He would conduct back-to-back searches on how to commit sexual assault and would type in several variations of the phrase, "how to molest sleeping girl." To forensics experts, this is an overt sign of desensitization to sexual activity. Excessive exposure to online pornography can have this effect over time. It can build up a tolerance to traditional ideas of sex, therefore requiring more potent forms of stimuli to achieve the same rush. For Stephen McDaniel, this began with watching abstract material on the internet and eventually led him to planning and then carrying out what he saw on screen. His target was 24-year-old Lauren Giddings, his next-door neighbor of 3 years. The thought that this monster had been living so close to Lauren, watching her, planning her murder while she went about her daily life as a lost student with dreams and aspirations, it makes my blood run cold even now. With respect to social vulnerabilities, Lauren essentially had none. She was outgoing and extremely popular, a well-liked member of her community with a strong social support system. When I interviewed her friends and classmates, every single person described her the same way. Kind, intelligent, driven, someone who lit up every room she entered. She was the kind of person who remembered your birthday, who would bring you soup when you were sick, who would stay up all night helping you study for an exam. With relation to psychological vulnerabilities, the term perceptual naivety would potentially come to light during our forensic investigation. Stephen had asked her out on a date within 6 months of their acquaintance, which was reportedly only the second time they had ever spoken. Lauren declined, but stated she would like to remain friends, which was only her being courteous and trying to soften the blow of rejection. She would later tell her actual friends that Stephen made her feel extremely uneasy and was uncomfortable to be around. It may have seemed like a non-essential observation at the time, but in hindsight, it appears that her instinctive senses were trying to tell her something. This is what haunts me most about this case. Lauren knew. Deep down, she knew something wasn't right about Stephen McDaniel. Lauren had told her friends multiple times that she felt someone had been inside her apartment. She also started getting an eerie vibe when she came back alone, especially late at night. It was as though she could sense something wasn't right, and she even thought about moving multiple times, but unfortunately never went through with it. If only she had trusted those instincts. If only she had acted on that fear. The reality was that Stephen McDaniel had stolen a master key from a security guard and let himself into her apartment to look around on several occasions. He also started filming her when she would leave and return to her apartment during all hours of the day. The violation of privacy, the systematic stalking, it was all happening right under our noses, and we had no idea. Had Lauren been in this situation before, or even known anyone who had, she may have trusted her intuition and unknowingly saved herself from a tragic fate. But that's the key word, trust. She had no proof of the danger she was in, only conviction, which unfortunately wasn't strong enough when it was most needed. This is something I think about every day. How many other women are out there right now, feeling that same unease, that same instinctive fear, but dismissing it because they have no concrete evidence? Stephen McDaniel snuck into Lauren's apartment once more on the night of June 26, 2011. Only this time, she was sleeping inside. As he crept into her bedroom, she awoke and immediately panicked once she saw the intruder. I can only imagine the terror she must have felt in that moment. Waking up to find someone in her bedroom, someone she recognized, someone she had tried to be kind to despite her instincts telling her to stay away. McDaniel then pounced on top of her and proceeded to strangle her for roughly 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That's how long Lauren fought for her life. 15 minutes of pure terror, of struggling against someone stronger than her, of probably wondering why this was happening to her, what she had done to deserve this fate. Lauren put up a courageous fight and clawed at her attacker's face and chest, which would later become crucial evidence in our case. But she was eventually overpowered and died of asphyxiation. When I think about Lauren's final moments, I have to remind myself that she didn't go quietly. She fought. She left evidence. In her final act, she helped us catch her killer. After the murder, Stephen dismembered Lauren's body in the bathtub with a hacksaw. He cut his victim into 5 pieces, placed each piece in a trash bag, and then disposed of each of them in separate trash cans around campus. The methodical nature of this disposal, the cold calculation required to dismember another human being, it speaks to a level of psychopathy that still chills me to the bone. 3 days later, Lauren's concerned friends would arrive at her apartment and let themselves in with a spare key. McDaniel would notice from his window and invite himself inside as he offered to help. The audacity of this move, inserting himself into the search for the woman he had just murdered, shows the level of manipulation and control he was trying to maintain over the situation. All of her belongings were still inside, including her cell phone, driver's license, and passport. A missing person report was filed that night. A search party commenced the next morning, and we would discover the victim's torso at 9:40 a.m. It was placed in a trash can next to the apartment complex. The rest of the victim's remains were never recovered, denying Lauren's family the closure of a complete burial. The investigation was then switched from a missing person case to murder. I remember the exact moment when everything changed, when that young officer's scream cut through the morning air, when we realized we weren't looking for a missing person anymore, but for a killer. The weight of that realization, the knowledge that someone in this quiet college town was capable of such brutality, it changed everything about how we approached this case. We canvassed the surrounding area and began conducting interviews with neighbors and classmates, one of whom was Stephen McDaniel. But he was first interviewed by the local news, and at the time was unaware that part of the victim's remains had been discovered. This interview would later become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in our case. Watching a killer pretend to be a concerned friend, knowing what we know now about what he had done just days before.
Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since. I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know anybody any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, I mean, we don't know where she is. I mean.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of. I think that's where they had recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body.
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
This was most likely a genuine reaction disguised as another. He was most likely feeling a sense of fear and shock over the fact that substantial evidence had been discovered, yet he played it off as a feeling of sorrow over the loss of his supposed friend. Watching this footage now, knowing what I know, I could see the moment when his carefully constructed facade began to crack. The way his face went pale, the way he seemed to struggle to maintain his composure. It wasn't grief for Lauren. It was fear that his crime was being uncovered.
I don't know anyone that would want to hurt her. She was as nice a person as there is.
Was she moving soon? Did you know anything about her?
Yeah. She was going to be moving out today. She was supposed to move out today.
The fact that Stephen knew Lauren was supposed to move out that day was another red flag that we didn't catch at the time. How would he know her moving schedule if they were just casual neighbors? This level of knowledge about her personal plans suggests he had been monitoring her activities far more closely than he initially let on. Stephen was interviewed by our department at 11:50 a.m. and offered to help in any way he could, yet came across as fidgety and apprehensive the entire time. I remember sitting across from him in that sterile interview room, watching his nervous energy, the way his eyes darted around the room, never quite meeting mine for more than a few seconds. There were two highlighted moments of this initial interview that immediately raised red flags for me. The first was when Stephen asserted that he was a virgin, saving himself for marriage. In my experience, when someone volunteers deeply personal information like this unprompted, they're usually trying to establish a particular image of themselves. He wanted us to see him as innocent, pure, incapable of sexual violence. It was a calculated move, and it made me more suspicious, not less. The second red flag was when I discovered scratch marks on his face and stomach, which he claimed were self-inflicted during sleep. But these weren't the kind of random scratches you get from tossing and turning. They were defensive wounds, the kind you get when someone is fighting for their life, clawing at their attacker. I'd seen enough crime scenes to recognize the pattern. At that point, Stephen unknowingly became our prime suspect. I asked if we could search his apartment, and Stephen reluctantly accepted. The hesitation in his voice, the way he seemed to be calculating the risks, it all pointed to someone who had something to hide. We transported him back to the complex with 4 other investigators. While searching his apartment, we discovered a collection that painted a disturbing picture of Stephen McDaniel's psyche. Swords, guns, toilet paper stockpiled, as if he was expecting an apocalyptic event, and most disturbingly, a mask made out of women's underwear. The most significant discovery, however, was a pack of condoms. When I confronted Stephen about why he would have such an item in his possession if he was staying celibate before marriage, he miraculously confessed to stealing them from another apartment. This gave us probable cause for arrest, and Stephen was placed in handcuffs and brought back to the police station. The contradiction was glaring and deliberate. Here was someone who claimed to be saving himself for marriage, yet he had stolen condoms. The mask made from women's underwear suggested disturbing sexual fantasies. The weapons collection indicated someone with violent tendencies. And those scratch marks, they told a story of a struggle, of someone fighting back against an attacker. Stephen's interrogation began just after 11 p.m., and what happened next was one of the most extraordinary pieces of interrogation footage to ever reach the public domain. I've conducted hundreds of interrogations in my career, but nothing prepared me for what Stephen McDaniel would do in that room. He transformed himself into something that was barely recognizable as human, a cold, emotionless entity that seemed to operate on a completely different psychological level than anything I'd encountered before. The monotone dialogue and lifeless demeanor reportedly started on the drive back to the police station, and his conduct throughout the entire procedure was not only mystifying, but almost impressive in its calculated nature. It was as if he had flipped a switch, shutting down every normal human response and emotion.
You know Detective Patterson, right?
Yes.
Do you remember, put your hands up here, you remember us talking earlier today, right?
Yes.
You remember me earlier in the day?
Yes.
When we came down here and talked a little bit and then we left?
Yes.
Okay. I need to know about this girl right here. You know her?
Yes.
Who is that?
Lauren Giddings.
Does she live next door to you?
Yes.
When's the last time you seen her?
2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Was you friends with Lauren?
Yes.
Look at me when you talk to me, son. Okay?
This was the moment everything became surreal. The suspect had morphed himself into this abnormal and extremely creepy character. Whether it was a strategy or some sort of mental breakdown was unclear, but what was incredible was that it somewhat dictated the pace of the interrogation. I had just closed the distance and commanded eye contact. Both recognized techniques to increase psychological pressure. Yet the absurdly haunting manner in which the suspect turned his head and fixed his gaze unnerved me to the point where I became the one to look away and reset my posture. This essentially never happens in interrogations, as it can give a suspect an incredible boost in confidence. But Stephen wasn't looking for confidence. He was looking to unsettle us, to throw us off our game. And in that moment, he succeeded. The way he slowly turned his head, the empty stare, the complete absence of normal human emotion. It was like looking into the eyes of a predator, something that operates purely on instinct and calculation.
And you've lived next to Lauren for a long time?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know where she's at tonight?
No.
Just tell me what happened, brother.
I don't know.
Well, where's she at? I'm asking you for your help. I'm a detective, and I'm asking you for your help. Okay? I'm asking you for help. I need your help. Can you help me?
I don't know.
Do you even care that no one can find her?
Yes.
For the first 20 minutes, Stephen maintained this emotionless demeanor without wavering. It was like interrogating a robot, something that had been programmed to give minimal responses while revealing nothing of substance. I decided to change tactics, becoming more aggressive to see if that might coax him out of this act and into defending his dignity. But even when I attacked his character directly, he remained unmoved.
And I'm asking you about it, and you're just saying, I don't know. That's all. That's the only answer you can give is I don't know. But 6 hours or a couple hours ago, you was out there telling the media everything. You didn't stand in front of that camera and say, I don't know. You were actually answering questions. You know. You're just a sorry piece of shit that don't give a fuck. Right?
No.
Do you think that was a proper thing to do when a mother's looking for her child?
They asked me what happened.
And what did you tell them? What did you tell them?
That Lauren was missing.
The fact that he agreed with my assessment of him as a sorry piece of shit was telling. Most innocent people would react with indignation, would defend themselves, would show some emotion. But Stephen just accepted it, as if he knew it was true, as if he had already accepted what he was. It was a chilling moment of self-awareness from someone who seemed otherwise completely disconnected from reality. A second detective entered the room with a similar strategy of immediate aggression. We had completely bypassed rapport building, which is usually done before applying psychological pressure. But Stephen's behavior was so abnormal that we were essentially improvising, trying anything that might crack through his psychological armor.
When was the last time you shot those guns?
I haven't.
You've never shot a gun?
No.
Have you ever shot any gun in your whole life?
No.
Never.
No.
So you bought 3 guns that you've never shot?
Yes.
Why?
To have.
For what?
To have.
For what? I'm asking for what?
The second detective moved in close, locking eye contact with Stephen. This was pure psychological warfare. Whoever looked away first would lose. These moments can sometimes last for minutes, a battle of wills between interrogator and suspect. But Stephen didn't just maintain eye contact. He seemed to relish it, as if he was feeding off the psychological tension.
And you know, and me and you both know it's no different than when you was a little kid, right? And you reached in that cookie jar and you got caught after your mama told you not to get that cookie. And when she was, did you get a cookie? No. And whenever you tell a lie, you feel bad about it right then. One, with every lie, there's a chance you're going to get caught. And that weighs on you. Because you know you did something bad. Am I right?
I didn't do it.
You smell like you've been cleaning up, like you've been using cleaner to clean up. I know what that smells like. My wife smells like that all the time when she cleans the house. You've been using some kind of cleaner to clean up your apartment, haven't you?
No.
This was the widely recognized futility technique, used to make the subject believe it's useless to resist due to overwhelming evidence against them. It's most effective when the interrogator can play on doubts that already exist in the subject's mind. The only problem here was that Stephen didn't dismember Lauren inside his apartment. It all happened in Lauren's apartment. So the detective's bluff was already called at this point, but Stephen's response remained the same: cold, calculated denial.
There's blood in your apartment, Stephen. You didn't get it all up. It didn't all come off. You scrubbed and you wiped. But we can tell that. Don't you watch CSI? Yeah, we know it. Stephen, why is there blood in your bathroom?
The detective now completely shifted his strategy from confrontational and aggressive to sympathetic and understanding. He attempted to create a connection and then afford Stephen a more socially acceptable reason for the crime. This is extremely difficult to pull off after a direct confrontation, as there is no established rapport or trust. The usual routine is the exact opposite. You would first build rapport and then get aggressive once a connection has been established.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell it. I wanted to be here with you to go through that process because I know you're not a monster, man. I know you're not a bad guy. You're just a hard-working student trying to pass a bar exam, ain't you? You ain't got a lot of support from your family, do you?
Yes.
You do?
The strategy failed at the first hurdle. Stephen immediately shut down the offered sympathy and reasoning behind the alleged crime, which was the concept of unsupportive parents. But the detective attempted to roll with it, trying to find any angle that might create a crack in Stephen's psychological armor. But Stephen remained unmoved, unchanged, unaffected by any attempt at human connection.
Did you hurt that girl, Stephen?
No.
Had you ever hurt anyone, Stephen?
No.
You've never hurt anyone.
No.
I've hurt people, Stephen. I've made mistakes in my life. It's not even normal to say you've never hurt anybody. Sometimes people get mad and they say things they don't mean to say. It hurts. You never kicked a dog or a cat?
The lead detective then asked non-confrontational questions for almost 30 minutes, most likely to see if it would change the suspect's demeanor and the manner in which he responded. But it didn't. Stephen maintained the same lifeless disposition, which he had now kept up for almost 90 minutes. It was an incredible performance of psychological endurance, but it was also deeply disturbing to witness.
You know what's crazy? I was talking to people that he works with and everything. They talk about how he's always expresses himself.
But he don't know.
He's very talkative. Stephen, they say you're so talkative, buddy, that you're always so friendly. You stop in and say hello, and you talk. Why is it that you're acting so short with us tonight? If you have all this character and personality about you, why is it that everything that we get from you is yes, no, or I don't know?
I don't know.
The entire interrogation took over 2 hours. When sped up, you truly get a glimpse of how remarkable the suspect's catatonic performance was. His mother came to speak with him soon after this moment, and although he maintained his innocence, he immediately snapped out of the zombie-like character. It's difficult to interpret the reasoning behind the performance, whether it was a pre-planned strategy, improvised in the moment, or some type of psychological breakdown. But whatever it was, it evidently seemed to work, as we got nothing from him. The suspect's behavior was so abnormal that we were essentially at a loss with what to do or where to even start with a specific plan of attack. Despite the failed interrogation, the evidence against Stephen McDaniel was irrefutable. What we discovered in the following days painted a picture of systematic stalking and premeditated murder that was both comprehensive and horrifying. Hundreds of pictures of Lauren were discovered on Stephen's flash drive, along with multiple video recordings from inside her apartment. These weren't casual photos or accidental recordings. They were the systematic documentation of a predator studying his prey. The videos showed Lauren in her most private moments, unaware that she was being watched, recorded, cataloged by the monster living next door. A hacksaw was found in a supply closet of the apartment complex, and it was stained with what DNA testing later confirmed was Lauren's blood. The packaging for that exact same hacksaw was found in Stephen's apartment, a direct link between the murder weapon and our suspect. The methodical nature of this evidence collection showed that Stephen had planned this crime well in advance. But perhaps the most damning evidence was Stephen's internet search history. What we found there was a window into the mind of a predator, a systematic progression from fantasy to reality that showed exactly how Stephen McDaniel had prepared himself to become a killer, without going into specific detail that might inspire copycat behavior. Stephen's browsing history revealed an obsession with violent pornography and detailed research into methods of sexual assault. He had searched for multiple variations of phrases related to attacking sleeping victims, researching chloroform, studying methods of restraint and disposal. To forensic experts, this represented a clear pattern of escalation. Excessive exposure to violent pornography can create a tolerance that requires increasingly extreme stimuli. For Stephen McDaniel, what began as consuming violent content online eventually led to planning and executing those same acts in real life. The progression was clear and terrifying. From viewing violent content, to researching methods of attack, to acquiring the tools necessary, the hacksaw, the stolen master key, to finally carrying out the murder. Each step was documented in his digital footprint, creating an undeniable timeline of premeditation. As I delved deeper into Stephen McDaniel's background in psychology, I began to understand how someone could become capable of such calculated evil. According to his roommate's testimony, McDaniel had openly stated that he had no conscience and enjoyed the feeling of power. He wanted to establish dominance over his victim and experience the ultimate control, holding someone's life in his hands. He had even told his roommate that he would use chloroform to subdue his victim, discussing his plans as if they were academic exercises rather than preparations for murder. This level of detachment, this ability to discuss violence so casually, indicated a complete absence of empathy or normal human emotion. What was most terrifying was that McDaniel had been planning the perfect murder for an extended period. He had purchased the Stanley hacksaw months in advance, prepared components to make chloroform including bleach, and stolen the master key that would give him access to Lauren's apartment. Every element was meticulously planned and prepared. The evidence showed a systematic pattern of stalking behavior that had escalated over months. McDaniel had been watching Lauren methodically, learning her routines, her vulnerabilities, her schedule. He had entered her apartment multiple times when she wasn't home, familiarizing himself with the layout, perhaps even taking items as trophies. Lauren had repeatedly told friends she felt someone had been in her apartment. She had that instinctive sense that something wasn't right, that her space had been violated. Her instincts were trying to warn her of the danger she was in, but she had no concrete evidence to act upon. McDaniel had also been filming her when she would leave and return to her apartment at all hours of the day. He had turned watching Lauren into a daily routine, recording her every activity, studying her like a scientist studies a lab specimen. The violation of privacy was complete and systematic. The evolution of technology over the past 2 decades has made forensic investigations considerably more efficient, and Stephen McDaniel's case was a perfect example of how digital evidence can provide unprecedented insight into a criminal's mindset. His internet search history revealed a terrifying psychological portrait that would have been impossible to uncover in previous eras. McDaniel's browsing patterns showed a clear progression from curiosity to obsession to planning. He had spent countless hours researching methods of attack, studying techniques used by other criminals, and consuming increasingly violent content. The digital breadcrumbs he left behind created a roadmap of his psychological deterioration. What struck me most was the methodical nature of his research. This wasn't random browsing or momentary curiosity. It was systematic preparation. He had researched everything from the effects of different drugs on consciousness to methods of body disposal, from techniques for avoiding detection to ways of manipulating crime scenes. The technology that enabled his crime also became the tool of his downfall. Every search, every video, every photograph was preserved in digital form, creating an undeniable record of his intentions and actions. In previous decades, this kind of evidence simply wouldn't have existed. But technology also enabled his stalking behavior in ways that would have been impossible before. The ability to record video with small, hidden cameras, to research victims through social media, to plan crimes using online resources, all of these capabilities gave predators like McDaniel unprecedented tools for hunting their victims. The case highlighted both the benefits and dangers of our digital age. While technology helped us catch and convict McDaniel, it also provided him with the means to stalk, plan, and execute his crime with a level of sophistication that would have been unimaginable to previous generations of criminals. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence against him, Stephen McDaniel eventually took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. His detailed confession provided the final pieces of the puzzle, confirming our worst fears about what had happened to Lauren in her final moments. In his confession, McDaniel described the events of that fatal night with the same cold detachment he had shown during his interrogation. He recounted going to Lauren's bedroom door and standing there, watching her sleep before the floor creaked and woke her up. When she saw him in her apartment at 4:30 a.m. on June 26, 2011, she told him to leave. Instead, he jumped across the bed on top of her and grabbed her neck. They rolled off the bed onto the floor, and while she was trying to get away from him, she pulled the mask off his face and recognized her attacker. She begged him to stop, but he continued to strangle her with his hands until she stopped moving. The confession continued with McDaniel describing how he moved Lauren's body to the bathtub and returned to his apartment, where he stayed all day. That night, he returned and dismembered her with a hacksaw. He wrapped the limbs and head in multiple black trash bags and threw them in dumpsters at Mercer Law School across the street. He cut up his mask, gloves, and shirt into small pieces and flushed them down the toilet. Reading this confession, I was struck by the complete absence of remorse or emotion in McDaniel's account. He described the murder and dismemberment of a young woman, as if he were recounting a mundane daily activity. There was no acknowledgement of Lauren's humanity, no recognition of the life he had taken, no understanding of the pain he had caused. The clinical nature of his confession was perhaps more disturbing than the crime itself. It revealed a level of psychological detachment that suggested McDaniel truly didn't understand the moral weight of his actions. To him, Lauren wasn't a person with hopes, dreams, and people who loved her. She was simply an object to be used and discarded. The reaction of McDaniel's family when they learned their son was a killer provided another layer of tragedy to this case. His mother, Glenda McDaniel, initially completely defended her son and believed he was innocent. The cognitive dissonance of learning that someone you love is capable of such evil is something I've witnessed many times in my career, but it never gets easier to watch. In those initial lengthy phone calls between Stephen and his mother, Glenda McDaniel defended her son with the fierce loyalty that only a parent can have. She seemed certain of his innocence and spoke of having a big hug for him when he gets out. The pain in her voice was evident. This was a mother trying to reconcile the son she had raised with the monster he had become. But as the evidence mounted and the truth became undeniable, I watched Glenda McDaniel's world collapse. The realization that her son was not only guilty, but had committed such a heinous crime against an innocent young woman. It broke something in her that I don't think ever fully healed. The transformation she described, seeing her son look different, speaks to the psychological change that had occurred in Stephen. The mask had finally slipped, and the monster beneath was visible even to his own mother. Meanwhile, Lauren's family was dealing with their own unimaginable grief. They had lost their daughter in the most horrific way possible, and they would never even have her complete remains to bury. The rest of Lauren's body, her head, arms, and legs, were never recovered, taken away in a garbage truck and lost forever. At the sentencing hearing, Lauren's mother looked directly into McDaniel's eyes and said simply, "You are evil." Those two words carried the weight of a mother's grief, a family's loss, and a community's outrage. They were perhaps the most powerful statement made during the entire legal proceedings. The Lauren Giddings case left lasting impacts that extended far beyond the courtroom. Mercer Law School implemented numerous security changes, including improved locking systems, increased security patrols, and personal safety courses for students. But these changes came too late for Lauren. The case also became an important study in forensic psychology, particularly regarding the role of internet pornography in escalating violent behavior. Researchers pointed to McDaniel's case as an example of how consuming increasingly extreme content online can desensitize individuals to violence and potentially lead to real-world criminal behavior. For law enforcement, the case highlighted both the opportunities and challenges presented by digital evidence. While McDaniel's internet history provided crucial insight into his mindset and planning, it also raised questions about privacy, surveillance, and the balance between security and civil liberties. The case forced a broader conversation about stalking, particularly the difficulty victims face in getting help when they sense danger but lack concrete evidence. Lauren's repeated statements that she felt someone had been in her apartment, her instinctive unease around McDaniel. These warning signs were dismissed or minimized because they couldn't be proven. This aspect of the case has had perhaps the most lasting impact on how I approach investigations. Now, when someone reports feeling stalked or unsafe, I take those concerns seriously even without physical evidence. Lauren's instincts were trying to save her life, but she didn't have the support or resources to act on them effectively. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of young women living alone, particularly in environments like college campuses where security might be lax and where predators can more easily blend in with the community. Lauren should have been safe in her own home, in her own bed, but the very proximity that made McDaniel seem harmless also made him incredibly dangerous. As I reflect on this case now, years after my retirement, I'm struck by several things that continue to haunt me. First, the importance of listening to victims when they express fear or unease, even without concrete evidence. Lauren told multiple people she felt unsafe, that she thought someone had been in her apartment. We need to take these concerns seriously and provide resources for people to act on their instincts. Second, the role of technology in modern crimes. McDaniel's internet history was crucial to understanding his mindset and building our case, but technology also enabled his crime. He used it to stalk Lauren, to research methods of attack, to plan his assault. The same tools that help us solve crimes also help criminals commit them. Third, the complexity of human psychology. McDaniel appeared normal to most people who knew him. He was a law student, articulate, seemingly harmless. But beneath that facade was a deeply disturbed individual capable of unimaginable violence. This duality, the normal exterior hiding a monstrous interior, is what makes cases like this so terrifying and so difficult to prevent. The interrogation footage of McDaniel remains one of the most chilling pieces of evidence I've ever encountered. His ability to completely shut down emotionally, to become almost robotic in his responses, was unlike anything I'd seen in over 2 decades of police work. It was a performance, but it was also a glimpse into the mind of someone who operates on a completely different psychological level than normal human beings. I often wonder what signs we might have missed, what red flags could have saved Lauren's life if only we'd been looking in the right direction. The systematic nature of McDaniel's stalking, his careful planning, his acquisition of tools and access, all of this was happening right under our noses, and we had no idea. But perhaps most importantly, this case taught me about the resilience of the human spirit. Lauren fought back, even in her final moments, facing overwhelming terror and violence. She left evidence that helped us catch her killer. Her courage in those final minutes, her refusal to go quietly, it speaks to a strength of character that continues to inspire me. The case also showed me the importance of never giving up on a victim, even after they're gone. Lauren couldn't speak for herself anymore, but we could speak for her. We could ensure that her killer faced justice, that her story was told, that her memory was honored. In some small way, we could give her family the closure they deserved, even though we couldn't bring her back. The Stephen McDaniel case represents more than just one isolated incident of violence. It's a window into broader societal issues that we're still grappling with today. The role of violent pornography in shaping criminal behavior, the challenges of identifying and stopping stalkers before they escalate to violence, the vulnerability of young women in our society. These are all issues that extend far beyond this single case. The case also highlighted the double-edged nature of our digital age. While technology provided us with unprecedented evidence of McDaniel's intentions and planning, it also gave him tools for stalking and researching his crime that previous generations of criminals never had access to. The internet allowed him to consume increasingly violent content, to research methods of attack, and to plan his crime with a level of sophistication that would have been impossible in earlier eras. This raises difficult questions about the balance between freedom and safety in our digital world. How do we protect potential victims without infringing on privacy rights? How do we identify dangerous individuals before they act without creating a surveillance state? How do we address the role of violent content in potentially inspiring real-world violence without restricting free speech? The case also forced a conversation about the culture of violence against women that exists in our society. McDaniel didn't exist in a vacuum. He was shaped by cultural messages about power, control, and the objectification of women. His progression from consuming violent pornography to planning and executing a real murder reflects broader societal issues about how we view and treat women. For law enforcement, the case highlighted the need for better training in recognizing and investigating stalking behavior. Traditional approaches to domestic violence and sexual assault weren't adequate for dealing with the systematic, technological stalking that McDaniel employed. We needed new tools, new techniques, and new understanding to effectively combat this type of predatory behavior. The case also showed the importance of interagency cooperation and information sharing. McDaniel's behavior might have been identified earlier if there had been better communication between different law enforcement agencies, campus security, and mental health professionals. The warning signs were there, but they were scattered across different systems and organizations. Even now, years after the case was closed, questions remain that continue to trouble me. The rest of Lauren's body, her head, arms, and legs, were never found. According to McDaniel, a garbage truck collected the contents of a dumpster where he disposed of these remains. This means Lauren's family never got to have a complete funeral for their daughter, never got the closure that comes with laying a loved one to rest completely. The psychological evaluation of McDaniel revealed a complex individual whose motivations we may never fully understand. His ability to maintain that emotionless facade during interrogation, his meticulous planning, his complete lack of empathy, these traits painted a picture of someone with severe psychological disorders, but they didn't explain why he chose Lauren as his victim. Was it simply proximity and opportunity? Was there something specific about Lauren that triggered his obsession? Or was she just unlucky enough to live next door to a monster who was going to kill someone, and she happened to be the most accessible target? The systematic nature of his stalking suggests that this wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity, but rather a carefully planned execution of long-held fantasies. But what created those fantasies in the first place? What experiences, influences, or psychological factors shaped McDaniel into someone capable of such calculated evil? These questions matter because they might help us identify and stop future Stephen McDaniels before they act. If we can understand what creates monsters like him, perhaps we can intervene earlier, provide treatment, or at least monitor individuals who show similar warning signs. But perhaps some questions don't have satisfying answers. Perhaps some evil is simply inexplicable, some violence simply senseless. Perhaps the most important thing isn't understanding why McDaniel did what he did, but rather learning how to better protect potential victims and support survivors of violence. The case also raises questions about the effectiveness of our criminal justice system in dealing with individuals like McDaniel. He received a life sentence with a possibility of parole after 30 years, meaning he could potentially be released when he's 56 years old. Is that justice for Lauren? Is that adequate protection for society? These are questions that each person must answer for themselves. The impact of Lauren's murder extended far beyond her immediate family and friends. The entire Mercer Law School community was traumatized by the realization that one of their own students was capable of such violence. The sense of safety and security that should exist in an academic environment was shattered, replaced by suspicion and fear. Other students began to question their own safety, their own relationships, their own ability to judge character. If Lauren, smart, popular, well-liked Lauren, could be murdered by someone she knew, someone who seemed harmless, then who could be trusted? The psychological impact on her classmates and friends was profound and long-lasting. The case also sent shockwaves through the legal community. Here was a law student, someone training to uphold justice and protect the innocent, who had committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. It forced law schools across the country to examine their screening processes, their support systems for students under stress, and their responsibility for monitoring student behavior. The media coverage of the case was extensive, and not all of it was responsible. Some outlets sensationalized the story, focusing more on the bizarre aspects of McDaniel's behavior than on the tragedy of Lauren's death. This added to the family's pain and highlighted the need for more ethical reporting in true crime cases. The case also became a touchstone for discussions about violence against women, stalking behavior, and the role of technology in modern crimes. It was cited in academic papers, used in training programs for law enforcement, and referenced in policy discussions about campus safety and domestic violence prevention. For the broader community, the case served as a stark reminder that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most seemingly safe environments. It challenged assumptions about who can be trusted, what warning signs to look for, and how to protect oneself and loved ones from predatory behavior. The ripple effects continue to this day. Every time a similar case makes headlines, Lauren's story is remembered and retold. Her death has become part of the broader conversation about violence against women, serving as both a cautionary tale and a call to action for better protection and prevention measures. The Lauren Giddings case taught law enforcement valuable lessons about investigating stalking behavior, utilizing digital evidence, and recognizing the warning signs of escalating violence. These lessons have been incorporated into training programs and investigative protocols across the country. One of the most important lessons was the need to take stalking reports seriously, even when they lack concrete evidence. Lauren's repeated statements that she felt someone had been in her apartment should have triggered a more thorough investigation. We needed to develop better protocols for investigating these types of reports and providing protection for potential victims. The case also highlighted the importance of digital forensics in modern investigations. McDaniel's internet search history provided crucial insight into his mindset and planning that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional investigative methods. This emphasized the need for law enforcement to develop better capabilities in digital evidence collection and analysis. The interrogation of McDaniel also provided valuable lessons about dealing with suspects who employ unusual psychological tactics. His ability to shut down emotionally and become unresponsive challenged traditional interrogation techniques and forced us to develop new approaches for dealing with similar suspects. The case demonstrated the importance of interagency cooperation and information sharing. Warning signs about McDaniel's behavior might have been identified earlier if there had been better communication between campus security, local law enforcement, and mental health professionals. It also showed the need for better training in recognizing and investigating technology-enabled stalking. Traditional approaches to stalking cases weren't adequate for dealing with the sophisticated surveillance and planning that McDaniel employed. We needed new tools and techniques to effectively combat this type of predatory behavior. The case emphasized the importance of preserving and analyzing digital evidence. In an era where criminals increasingly use technology to plan and execute their crimes, law enforcement must stay ahead of these technological trends and develop the capabilities to effectively investigate digital evidence. Finally, the case highlighted the need for better victim support services. Lauren's friends and family needed more resources and support throughout the investigation and legal proceedings. We learned the importance of providing comprehensive victim services that address not just the immediate needs of survivors, but their long-term psychological and emotional needs as well. Stephen McDaniel is currently serving his life sentence at Hancock State Prison in Sparta, Georgia. He will be eligible for parole in 2041, when he's 56 years old, but the likelihood of approval is extremely low. Prosecutor David Cook stated that he fully expects McDaniel will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The sentencing brought some measure of closure to Lauren's family and friends, but it could never truly heal the wounds left by her murder. Justice was served in the legal sense, but the deeper questions about why this happened and how it could have been prevented remain largely unanswered. McDaniel's attempts at appeal have been consistently denied. In 2018, his father started a GoFundMe campaign to raise funds for legal costs needed for appeal, but the website was quickly taken down due to fierce community backlash. That same year, McDaniel represented himself in court when arguing for a new trial, claiming his constitutional rights were violated, but the judge denied the appeal. The legal proceedings revealed the full extent of McDaniel's planning and preparation. Evidence showed that he had been systematically stalking Lauren for months, entering her apartment without permission, filming her without her knowledge, and researching methods of attack and disposal. The premeditated nature of the crime was undeniable. The case also revealed the inadequacy of our systems for identifying and stopping predators before they act. Despite numerous warning signs, his disturbing internet searches, his collection of weapons, his inappropriate behavior toward women, his theft of the master key, no intervention occurred until after Lauren was already dead. This failure of prevention is perhaps the most troubling aspect of the entire case. We had the tools and knowledge necessary to identify McDaniel as a potential threat, but we lacked the systems and protocols to act on that information effectively. Lauren's death was preventable, and that knowledge continues to haunt everyone involved in the investigation. The verdict brought legal closure, but couldn't bring Lauren back or undo the trauma inflicted on her family and community. It couldn't answer the deeper questions about how to prevent similar tragedies in the future. It couldn't heal the wounds left by the realization that monsters sometimes live next door, hiding behind masks of normalcy while planning unspeakable acts of violence. Lauren Giddings would have been 38 years old today. She should have been practicing law, maybe married with children, making a difference in the world through her work and her relationships. Instead, her life was cut short by a monster who saw her not as a human being with hopes and dreams, but as an object to be used and discarded. But Lauren's legacy extends beyond the tragedy of her death. Her story has become a powerful reminder of the importance of trusting our instincts, of taking stalking seriously, of supporting victims even when they lack concrete evidence of their danger. Her courage in fighting back against her attacker, even in her final moments, helped ensure that her killer was caught and convicted. The changes implemented at Mercer Law School and other institutions in response to her murder have potentially saved other lives. The increased awareness of stalking behavior, the improved security measures, the better training for law enforcement, these are all part of Lauren's legacy. Her story has also contributed to broader conversations about violence against women, the role of technology in modern crimes, and the need for better prevention and intervention strategies. Academic researchers, law enforcement professionals, and policymakers continue to study her case and use it to develop better approaches to protecting potential victims. Lauren's family has worked to ensure that her memory is honored and that her death serves a purpose in preventing similar tragedies. They have supported research into stalking behavior, advocated for better victim protection laws, and shared their story to raise awareness about the warning signs of predatory behavior. The Lauren Giddings case serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to action. It reminds us that evil can lurk anywhere, that predators often hide behind masks of normalcy, and that we must remain vigilant in protecting ourselves and our loved ones. But it also shows us the importance of fighting back, of never giving up, of ensuring that victims are remembered and that their stories continue to make a difference long after they're gone. Lauren deserved better. She deserved to live, to love, to achieve her dreams. Instead, she became a victim of senseless violence. But her memory lives on, and perhaps her story will help protect others from suffering the same fate. That's not justice. Nothing can truly provide justice for what was taken from Lauren and her family, but it's something. It's a way of ensuring that her life and death continue to have meaning, continue to make a difference in the world. As I close this case file for the final time, I'm reminded of why I became a police officer in the first place. It wasn't for the excitement or the authority or the adrenaline rush of chasing criminals. It was because I believed in justice, in protecting the innocent, in standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The Lauren Giddings case tested that belief in ways I never expected. It forced me to confront the reality that sometimes, despite our best efforts, evil wins. Sometimes the innocent suffer while the guilty go free, at least for a while. Sometimes justice comes too late to save the people who needed it most. But it also reinforced my belief in the importance of what we do. Every case we solve, every criminal we catch, every victim we help, it all matters. It may not bring back the dead or undo the trauma inflicted on survivors, but it serves a purpose. It sends a message that violence will not be tolerated, that victims will be remembered, that justice will eventually prevail. The Lauren Giddings case will always be with me, not just because of its brutality or its complexity, but because of what it taught me about human nature, both its darkest depths and its capacity for resilience, courage, and love in the face of unimaginable loss. Lauren fought back, even facing overwhelming terror and violence. She left evidence that helped us catch her killer. Her courage in those final minutes, her refusal to go quietly, speaks to a strength of character that continues to inspire me years later. Her family's grace and dignity throughout the investigation and trial, their commitment to honoring her memory and preventing similar tragedies, shows the best of humanity in the face of the worst. They could have been consumed by bitterness and hatred, but instead, they chose to channel their grief into positive action. The case also reminded me of the importance of never giving up, never accepting that some crimes are unsolvable or some criminals are uncatchable. The evidence was there. We just had to be smart enough and persistent enough to find it and piece it together. Technology gave us tools that previous generations of investigators never had, but it still required human intelligence, intuition, and determination to use those tools effectively. As I reflect on my career and the hundreds of cases I've worked, the Lauren Giddings case stands out not just for its horror, but for its lessons. It taught me to listen more carefully to victims, to take stalking reports more seriously, to look for patterns in digital evidence, and to never underestimate the capacity for evil that can lurk behind a facade of normalcy. But most importantly, it taught me that every victim deserves justice, every family deserves answers, and every case deserves our best effort. Lauren Giddings was more than just a case number or a crime statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, a future lawyer who wanted to make the world better. Her death diminished us all, but her memory continues to inspire us to do better, to be better, to never stop fighting for justice. The monsters are still out there. There are other Stephen McDaniels walking among U.S., planning their crimes, stalking their victims, waiting for their opportunity to strike. But there are also people like Lauren, brave, kind, resilient people who refuse to be victims, who fight back even in their darkest moments, who leave behind evidence and memories that help us catch the monsters and prevent future tragedies. That's the real legacy of the Lauren Giddings case. Not the horror of her death, but the inspiration of her life and the determination of those who loved her to ensure that her story continues to make a difference. Justice was served when Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison. But the real victory comes every time someone trusts their instincts about a potential threat, every time a stalking victim gets the help they need, every time a potential tragedy is prevented because we learned from Lauren's story. As I sat in that sterile interrogation room, watching Stephen McDaniel maintain his robotic facade for hours on end, I couldn't help but think about all the cases that had led me to this moment. 23 years of investigating murders, rapes, assaults, and domestic violence. But nothing had prepared me for the psychological chess match I was witnessing between my colleagues and this calculating killer. The transcripts from that interrogation still give me chills when I read them today. The way McDaniel could sit there, completely emotionless, while we confronted him with evidence of his horrific crime. It was like watching a machine malfunction, a human being who had somehow disconnected from every normal emotional response that makes us human. What struck me most was not just his ability to lie so effortlessly, but his complete lack of any genuine emotional reaction to Lauren's disappearance and death. When we showed him her photograph, when we talked about her family's anguish, when we described finding her dismembered remains, nothing, no flicker of remorse, no crack in his facade, no acknowledgement that he had destroyed a beautiful young life and devastated countless others. The interrogation revealed layers of deception that went far beyond the murder itself. His claims about being a virgin, his lies about his vehicles, his fabricated stories about his whereabouts. Every aspect of his life seemed to be built on carefully constructed falsehoods designed to present an image of harmless normalcy while concealing the monster beneath. What haunted me most was realizing how long he had been planning this. The stolen master key, the purchased hacksaw, the systematic stalking and filming of Lauren. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was the methodical execution of a fantasy that had been building in his mind for months, possibly years. In the days following McDaniel's arrest, our digital forensics team began the painstaking process of analyzing his electronic devices. What they found painted a picture of obsession and escalating violence that was both comprehensive and deeply disturbing. McDaniel's computer contained hundreds of photographs of Lauren, taken without her knowledge or consent. These weren't casual snapshots or photos from social media. They were systematic surveillance images documenting her daily routines, her comings and goings, her most private moments. He had been watching her like a scientist studies a laboratory specimen, cataloging her every movement and habit. The video recordings were even more chilling. Using a small camera, McDaniel had filmed Lauren inside her own apartment, capturing her in moments of vulnerability and privacy that should have been sacred. The violation was complete and systematic. He had turned her home, her sanctuary, into his personal voyeuristic theater. But perhaps most damning was his internet search history. The progression was clear and terrifying. From viewing increasingly violent pornography to researching methods of sexual assault, from studying techniques for rendering victims unconscious to investigating body disposal methods. Each search was a step closer to the horrific reality he would eventually create. The digital evidence also revealed the extent of his preparation. He had researched chloroform production, studied the effects of various drugs on consciousness, and investigated methods for avoiding detection during and after violent crimes. This wasn't the impulsive act of someone who snapped. It was the carefully planned execution of a long-held fantasy. What made the digital evidence so powerful was its undeniable nature. McDaniel could lie to us, could maintain his emotionless facade, could claim innocence, but the computers don't lie. Every search, every download, every photograph was time-stamped and preserved, creating an irrefutable timeline of his psychological deterioration and criminal planning. The technology that enabled his stalking and planning also became the instrument of his downfall. In previous eras, this kind of evidence simply wouldn't have existed. A killer's fantasies and preparations would have remained hidden in his mind, accessible only through confession or the testimony of others. But in our digital age, every click, every search, every download leaves a permanent record that can be recovered and analyzed by forensic experts. The arrest of Stephen McDaniel sent shockwaves through the Mercer Law School community and the broader Macon area. Here was someone who had walked among them for years, attended classes, worked at the district attorney's office, presented himself as a future lawyer dedicated to justice. And all the while, he was planning and executing one of the most heinous crimes in the area's history. The psychological impact on Lauren's classmates and friends was profound and lasting. Many reported feeling violated, not just by the crime itself, but by the realization that they had been deceived so completely. They had shared classrooms with a killer, had conversations with someone who was simultaneously planning murder, had trusted someone who was fundamentally untrustworthy. The sense of betrayal was particularly acute among those who had worked with McDaniel at the district attorney's office. Here was someone who had been on their side, helping to prosecute criminals and seek justice for victims, while secretly planning to become the very type of predator they were working to stop. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming for many of his former colleagues. For the broader community, the case shattered assumptions about safety and security. If someone like McDaniel, educated, articulate, seemingly normal, could be capable of such violence, then who could be trusted? The randomness of Lauren's selection as a victim was particularly terrifying. She hadn't done anything to provoke or deserve this fate. She was simply unlucky enough to live next door to a monster. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of young women living alone, particularly in environments like college campuses where security might be lax and where predators can more easily blend in with the community. Lauren should have been safe in her own home, in her own bed, but the very proximity that made McDaniel seem harmless also made him incredibly dangerous. The media coverage of the case was intense and sometimes problematic. While the public had a right to know about the crime and the investigation, some outlets sensationalized the story, focusing more on the bizarre aspects of McDaniel's behavior than on the tragedy of Lauren's death. This added to the family's pain and highlighted the need for more responsible reporting in true crime cases. The case became a catalyst for discussions about stalking, campus safety, and the warning signs of predatory behavior. It forced institutions to examine their security protocols and support systems, leading to improvements that potentially saved other lives. But these changes came too late for Lauren, and that knowledge continues to haunt everyone involved in the case. Working with forensic psychologists and criminal profilers, we began to piece together a comprehensive psychological portrait of Stephen McDaniel. What emerged was a complex picture of someone who had likely been developing violent fantasies for years before finally acting on them. According to the experts, McDaniel exhibited classic signs of antisocial personality disorder, characterized by a complete lack of empathy, an inability to form genuine emotional connections, and a willingness to manipulate and harm others for personal gratification. His ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while harboring such dark impulses was particularly chilling. The progression from fantasy to reality appeared to follow a predictable pattern. McDaniel had likely been consuming increasingly violent pornography for years, building up a tolerance that required more extreme stimuli to achieve the same psychological effect. This desensitization process gradually eroded whatever moral barriers might have prevented him from acting on his violent impulses. His systematic stalking of Lauren represented an escalation from passive consumption of violent content to active preparation for violence. The stolen master key, the hidden cameras, the detailed surveillance, all of these behaviors indicated someone who was methodically working toward a predetermined goal. The experts noted that McDaniel's choice of Lauren as a victim was likely based on a combination of factors: proximity and opportunity, certainly, but also her perceived vulnerability and his ability to study her routines and habits. He had turned her into an object of obsession, dehumanizing her to the point where he could rationalize the unthinkable. What made McDaniel particularly dangerous was his intelligence and his ability to plan. Unlike impulsive killers who act in the heat of passion, McDaniel had the intellectual capacity to think through his crime, anticipate potential problems, and develop strategies for avoiding detection. This made him far more dangerous than the average violent criminal. The psychological evaluation also revealed the extent of his narcissism and grandiosity. McDaniel genuinely believed he was smarter than law enforcement, that he could commit the perfect crime and get away with it. His behavior during the interrogation, the robotic responses, the emotional shutdown, was likely a calculated strategy designed to frustrate investigators and avoid incriminating himself. But perhaps most disturbing was the complete absence of remorse or empathy. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of his guilt, even when faced with the reality of Lauren's death and her family's anguish, McDaniel showed no genuine emotional response. He was, in the truest sense of the word, a psychopath, someone who could commit the most heinous acts without experiencing the normal human emotions that would prevent such behavior. As the evidence against McDaniel mounted, it became clear that we had an airtight case. The digital evidence, the physical evidence, the witness testimony, everything pointed to his guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. But the legal process was far from over, and the decisions made in the coming months would determine whether McDaniel would face the death penalty or spend the rest of his life in prison. The prosecution team, led by District Attorney David Cook, faced a difficult decision. They had enough evidence to pursue the death penalty, and many in the community felt that McDaniel's crimes warranted the ultimate punishment. The premeditated nature of the murder, the sexual component, the dismemberment of the body, all of these factors made the case death penalty eligible under Georgia law. However, pursuing the death penalty would mean a lengthy and expensive trial, with no guarantee of success. Death penalty cases can take years to resolve, and even if successful, the appeals process can drag on for decades. For Lauren's family, this would mean years of reliving the trauma, years of uncertainty, years of having their lives dominated by the man who had destroyed their daughter. The alternative was a plea bargain. McDaniel would plead guilty to murder and accept a life sentence without the possibility of parole. This would ensure that he would never be free again, while sparing Lauren's family the ordeal of a lengthy trial and the possibility that he might somehow escape the death penalty on appeal. After extensive consultation with Lauren's family, the prosecution decided to offer the plea bargain. It was a pragmatic decision, based on the reality that life without parole was effectively the same as a death sentence for someone McDaniel's age, while avoiding the years of legal proceedings that would keep the case in the headlines and the family in anguish. McDaniel's defense team, recognizing the overwhelming evidence against their client, advised him to accept the plea. Even the most skilled defense attorney would have had difficulty creating reasonable doubt in the face of such comprehensive evidence. The plea bargain was his best chance to avoid the death penalty and the only realistic option given the circumstances. The formal plea hearing was a somber affair. McDaniel stood before the judge and admitted his guilt in the same emotionless tone he had maintained throughout the investigation. There was no apology, no expression of remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. He simply recited the facts of his crime as if he were reading from a textbook. For Lauren's family, the plea represented a form of closure, but not the kind they had hoped for. They would never get to confront McDaniel in a full trial, never get to hear all the details of what had happened to their daughter, never get the complete truth about his motivations and actions. But they would also never have to endure the trauma of a lengthy trial or the possibility that he might somehow escape justice. The sentencing hearing provided Lauren's family with their only opportunity to address McDaniel directly and to make sure he understood the full impact of his actions. It was a powerful and emotional moment that I will never forget. Lauren's mother, Lauren Giddings, stood before the court and looked directly at McDaniel as she delivered her victim impact statement. Her words were simple but devastating. "You are evil." Those two words carried the weight of a mother's grief, a family's loss, and a community's outrage. They were perhaps the most powerful statement made during the entire legal proceedings. Other family members and friends also spoke, painting a picture of Lauren as a vibrant, caring young woman with unlimited potential. They talked about her dreams of becoming a lawyer, her plans for the future, her kindness and generosity toward others. They described the void her death had left in their lives and the ongoing pain they would carry forever. McDaniel listened to these statements with the same emotionless expression he had maintained throughout the investigation and legal proceedings. There was no visible reaction, no sign that the family's pain had any impact on him whatsoever. His complete lack of empathy was on full display for everyone in the courtroom to see. When given the opportunity to make a statement before sentencing, McDaniel declined. He had nothing to say to Lauren's family, no apology to offer, no explanation for his actions. His silence spoke volumes about his character and his complete inability to comprehend the magnitude of what he had done. Judge Howard Z. Sims sentenced McDaniel to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional time for other charges related to the case. The judge noted the premeditated nature of the crime, the suffering inflicted on the victim, and the ongoing pain caused to her family and community. McDaniel was immediately transported to Hancock State Prison, a maximum security facility in Sparta, Georgia, where he would spend the rest of his life. At 26 years old, he faced the prospect of growing old and dying behind bars, never again experiencing freedom, never again having the opportunity to hurt another innocent person. For Lauren's family, the sentencing represented the end of the legal proceedings, but not the end of their grief. They would continue to mourn their daughter's death and struggle with the knowledge that her killer was still alive while she was gone forever. But they could take some comfort in knowing that justice had been served and that McDaniel would never again be able to harm another young woman. Stephen McDaniel is currently serving his life sentence at Hancock State Prison, a maximum security facility that houses some of Georgia's most dangerous criminals. The prison is located in Sparta, Georgia, about 100 miles southeast of Macon, far from the community where he committed his crimes. Life in maximum security is harsh and unforgiving. McDaniel spends most of his time in his cell with limited opportunities for recreation or social interaction. He has no access to the internet, no ability to view the violent pornography that helped fuel his fantasies, no opportunity to stalk or harm another victim. The prison environment is particularly dangerous for someone with McDaniel's background. Inmates who have committed crimes against women, especially young women, are often targeted by other prisoners. McDaniel has likely spent much of his incarceration in protective custody, isolated from the general population for his own safety. Despite his circumstances, McDaniel has made several attempts to appeal his conviction and sentence. In 2018, his father started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for legal fees, but it was quickly shut down due to public outrage. McDaniel has also filed various motions claiming his rights were violated during the investigation and prosecution, but all have been denied by the courts. The appeals process has been particularly frustrating for Lauren's family, who thought the case was closed when McDaniel accepted his plea bargain. Each new filing, each new motion, each new appeal brings the case back into the headlines and forces them to relive their trauma all over again. Prison records show that McDaniel has been a model prisoner, avoiding disciplinary actions and keeping to himself. This behavior is consistent with his calculated nature. He likely understands that good behavior is his only hope for any improvement in his circumstances, however slight. He will be eligible to petition for parole in 2041, when he is 56 years old, but the likelihood of approval is virtually non-existent. Prosecutor David Cook has stated that he fully expects McDaniel will spend the rest of his life behind bars, and given the nature of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse, it's hard to imagine any parole board ever approving his release. For McDaniel, this means facing the prospect of spending the next 30 to 40 years in a small cell, with no meaningful human contact, no purpose or goal beyond simple survival. It's a form of living death, and perhaps the closest thing to justice that our legal system can provide for someone who committed such an unforgivable crime. Even now, more than a decade after Lauren's murder, there are aspects of this case that continue to trouble me. Questions that may never be fully answered. Mysteries that will likely remain unsolved until McDaniel decides to tell the complete truth, something that seems increasingly unlikely as the years pass. The most obvious unanswered question concerns the location of Lauren's remains. McDaniel dismembered her body into 5 pieces, but only her torso was ever recovered. According to his confession, he disposed of her head, arms, and legs in dumpsters around the Mercer Law School campus, and these remains were collected by garbage trucks and taken to a landfill. Despite extensive searches of the relevant landfills, these remains were never found. This means Lauren's family never got to bury their daughter completely, never got the closure that comes with laying a loved one to rest in their entirety. The knowledge that parts of Lauren are still out there somewhere, in some anonymous landfill, continues to cause her family additional pain. Another troubling question concerns the full extent of McDaniel's criminal behavior. Was Lauren his first victim, or had he committed other crimes that we never discovered? His level of sophistication, his careful planning, his ability to maintain such an elaborate facade, all of these suggest someone with experience in deception and possibly violence. We investigated this possibility thoroughly, looking into unsolved cases in areas where McDaniel had lived or visited, but we never found any definitive connections. However, the absence of evidence doesn't necessarily mean the absence of other crimes. McDaniel was intelligent and careful, and if he had committed other offenses, he might have been successful in concealing them. The psychological questions are perhaps even more troubling. What created this monster? What experiences, influences, or factors shaped McDaniel into someone capable of such calculated evil? His family background seemed relatively normal. His educational achievements were impressive. His outward behavior was unremarkable. How does someone with such apparent advantages become a killer? The role of violent pornography in his psychological development remains a subject of debate among experts. While it's clear that McDaniel consumed increasingly extreme content, the question of whether this material caused his violent behavior or simply reflected pre-existing tendencies is complex and controversial. Perhaps most disturbing is the question of whether this crime could have been prevented. The warning signs were there. Lauren's repeated statements that she felt someone had been in her apartment, her instinctive unease around McDaniel, the reports from classmates about his inappropriate behavior. If these signs had been taken more seriously, if there had been better systems in place for investigating stalking complaints, could Lauren's life have been saved? These questions will likely never be fully answered, but they serve an important purpose. They remind us that every case, no matter how thoroughly investigated, leaves behind mysteries and uncertainties. They challenge us to do better, to learn from our mistakes, to develop better systems for protecting potential victims and identifying dangerous individuals before they act. The Lauren Giddings case has had a lasting impact on law enforcement practices, campus security protocols, and our understanding of stalking behavior. The lessons learned from this tragedy have been incorporated into training programs and policies across the country, potentially saving other lives. One of the most important changes has been in how law enforcement responds to stalking complaints. Lauren's repeated statements that she felt someone had been in her apartment should have triggered a more thorough investigation. But at the time, we lacked the protocols and resources to properly investigate these types of reports. Today, most police departments have specialized units trained to investigate stalking cases, and there's a greater understanding of the warning signs and escalation patterns that can lead to violence. Officers are taught to take victims' concerns seriously, even when there's no physical evidence of criminal activity. Campus security has also been revolutionized in the wake of cases like Lauren's. Mercer Law School and institutions across the country have implemented improved lighting, better security cameras, enhanced access controls, and more comprehensive safety education programs. Students are taught to trust their instincts, to report suspicious behavior, and to take advantage of available safety resources. The case has also contributed to advances in digital forensics and the investigation of technology-enabled crimes. McDaniel's use of hidden cameras, his systematic documentation of Lauren's activities, and his extensive digital footprint provided a roadmap for investigators dealing with similar cases. Law enforcement agencies have invested heavily in digital forensics capabilities, recognizing that modern criminals increasingly use technology to plan, execute, and conceal their crimes. The ability to recover and analyze digital evidence has become a crucial tool in solving complex cases and building strong prosecutions. The case has also influenced academic research into the relationship between violent pornography consumption and real-world violence. While the causal relationships remain complex and controversial, there's growing recognition that excessive exposure to violent content can contribute to the desensitization and escalation that leads some individuals to commit violent acts. Perhaps most importantly, the case has raised awareness about the importance of listening to potential victims and taking their concerns seriously. Lauren's story has been told and retold in training programs, academic courses, and public awareness campaigns, serving as a powerful reminder that instincts and intuition can be life-saving tools. The changes made in response to Lauren's murder represent a form of legacy, a way of ensuring that her death serves a purpose in protecting others. While these improvements came too late to save Lauren, they have likely prevented other tragedies and will continue to do so in the years to come. As I write these final words about the Lauren Giddings case, I'm struck by the complexity of what we call justice. Stephen McDaniel was caught, prosecuted, and sentenced to life in prison. By any legal standard, justice was served. But for Lauren's family and friends, for everyone who knew and loved her, the scales will never truly be balanced. No amount of punishment can bring Lauren back or undo the trauma inflicted on those who loved her. No sentence, however severe, can restore the future that was stolen from her or heal the wounds left by her absence. Justice, in its purest form, would be Lauren alive and thriving, pursuing her dreams, making her mark on the world. That kind of justice is impossible. What we achieved instead was accountability, ensuring that McDaniel faced consequences for his actions and could never hurt another innocent person. We provided answers to Lauren's family about what happened to their daughter, even though those answers brought more pain than comfort. We sent a message to other potential predators that such crimes will not go unpunished. The case also serves as a testament to the power of persistence and thorough investigation. Despite McDaniel's attempts to conceal his crime and manipulate the investigation, the evidence ultimately revealed the truth. Technology that he used to stalk and plan his attack became the instrument of his downfall. His own arrogance and belief in his superiority led to mistakes that exposed his guilt. Lauren's memory lives on in the changes made to prevent similar tragedies, in the awareness raised about stalking and violence against women, and the countless people who have heard her story and been inspired to trust their instincts and protect themselves and others. Her death was senseless and tragic, but her legacy is one of protection and prevention. For me personally, this case changed how I approach investigations involving stalking and violence against women. It taught me to listen more carefully to victims' concerns, to look for patterns in digital evidence, and to never underestimate the capacity for evil that can hide behind a facade of normalcy. The case also reinforced my belief in the importance of what we do as law enforcement officers. Every case we solve, every criminal we catch, every victim we help, it all matters. We may not be able to prevent every tragedy or solve every crime, but we can ensure that those who commit such acts face consequences and that their victims are not forgotten. Stephen McDaniel will spend the rest of his life in prison, growing old and dying behind bars, never again experiencing freedom or the opportunity to harm another person. That's not perfect justice. Perfect justice would be Lauren alive and well, but it's the best our imperfect system can provide. Lauren Giddings was 24 years old when her life was cut short by a monster who saw her not as a human being, but as an object for his twisted fantasies. She should have had decades ahead of her, should have become the lawyer she dreamed of being, should have had the chance to make her mark on the world and touch countless lives with her kindness and intelligence. Instead, she became a victim, a case number, a cautionary tale. But she also became something more, a symbol of resilience, a catalyst for change, a reminder that every life has value and that those who take innocent lives must be held accountable. The Lauren Giddings case will always be with me, not just because of its brutality or complexity, but because of what it taught me about human nature, both its darkest depths and its capacity for love, courage, and determination in the face of unimaginable loss. Lauren fought back in her final moments, leaving evidence that helped us catch her killer. Her family fought for justice and found the strength to turn their grief into advocacy for others. That's the real legacy of this case. Not the horror of Lauren's death, but the inspiration of her life and the determination of those who loved her to ensure that her story continues to make a difference. In a world where evil sometimes seems to triumph, where innocence is too often destroyed by those who should protect it, Lauren's story reminds us that justice, however imperfect, is still possible. And in the end, that may be the most important lesson of all.